Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I have the honor right now to be sitting next to Scott Stornetta. Scott, how are you?
Just fine, thanks.
Thank you for taking the time. This is mainly for the Spanish-speaking community in the blockchain space. And I would really like to, well, you have been in the blockchain space even before we had the word blockchain. I would like, for the people who don't know your path, and what you have provided to the space. Can you please tell us how your process was and the journey until you were mentioned in the Satoshi white paper? What is the problem that you wanted to solve and how you solved it and when?
Sure. So, any work in the scientific, technical community is really always something that's built on top of something that someone's done before,
Yeah.
and then contributes to what people can do after. But I do have a particular slice in the middle of that where we did make a contribution along with my colleague Stuart Haber. And the real issue for us was I came to work at Bell Communications Research, part of
Okay.
the old Bell Labs system. And I was very concerned about the fact that all of the world's documents were going to be in digital form. And as you know, when a document is digital, it's easy to change
Yeah.
a little bit of it, and it's essentially impossible to know that anything has been changed. That's why we have all the photoshopping of
Yes.
images. And so I became very concerned about the issue of how we would create an immutable record, something that we knew hadn't been tampered or altered.
Yes.
And I began working immediately with my colleague Stuart Haber, who had a strong background in cryptography. It was sort of a combination of my obsession with the problem and Stuart's expertise
Yes.
that led us to a solution about how it is that you really can create an immutable digital record. And it really has to do with finding a way to link records together so that if there's an alteration, it sort of breaks the seal. It's not unlike when you have pharmaceutical medications. When you open them up, there's a seal across the top. And if you see that it has been tampered with,
Yeah.
then you know to probably not
Yes.
take that medicine. And so by linking the records together with a tamper evident seal and then distributing the records broadly,
Yes.
it's possible to create immutable records.
Yeah.
And that's really the baseline contribution that we made. That the Bitcoin white paper then applied that record to money transactions
Yes.
and found a way to strongly incentivize people to hold on to the records through the use of his, Adam Back's mining technique. And so again, we certainly didn't invent Bitcoin,
Yeah.
but we helped give it a good foundation.
Absolutely. What was your reaction? What did you feel and think when you saw Satoshi's white paper for the first time? Did you have to read it a couple of times to process it? How was that moment?
Okay, well, I hate to be candid. I hate to be overly candid about this, but we read it. Stuart and I
Yeah.
read it, and we said, very interesting application and whatnot. But we immediately felt that there were a couple of things that had been done wrong,
Okay. For
and
example?
that needed some improving. Well, I don't mean to.
Okay,
Again,
okay,
I
okay.
don't want to criticize Satoshi because whoever Satoshi is, they really accomplished something very significant.
Yes.
But just because it's a significant accomplishment doesn't mean that he did everything right.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
a big part of my talk today was to suggest that we should celebrate what Satoshi has done, but it doesn't mean that we can't move forward and find ways to further improve on what's working.
Okay, excellent. And currently, what are you working at and why?
So I had sort of retired is kind of semi-retired for a while, but the growth of the blockchain space and the interest that so many people had led me to kind of come out of that retirement and join up with an investment firm that invests in promising startup companies in the blockchain space.
All right, excellent. How do you see the market and the technology evolving in the following, let's say, 2 years? What is the direction that we are heading, in your opinion?
Well, let me start with the bad news and then let's talk about the good news.
Okay.
I think the bad news is that people still struggle to find the appropriate use cases for blockchain. And while there are many, there are also many who are not really appropriately applying it.
Yeah.
And
In which way do you think they are struggling?
Well,
What do you mean?
they are very centered on making the technology very exciting.
Yeah,
But what needs to be done is to really focus in on the user or the customer and ask what problem do they need solved now. And there's just a little too much technical excitement and not enough customer focus.
Absolutely. More, I think entrepreneurs need to focus more on human behavior and the right timing.
Excellent point.
Human behavior.
People really need to understand how blockchain can influence and benefit human behavior in order to create something of genuine value.
Where do you see potential in the next 5 years for the application of this technology, in your opinion?
Sure, I think there are a number of areas that will very much find opportunity. One is, it's a little bit mundane, but it's a very large expense of many institutions to have to reconcile and settle their books with respect to another institution. And so, for example, 2 insurance companies, this is one of my favorite examples. There are 2 automobile insurance companies. And whenever someone from company A hits someone from company B's car, company A has to pay them money. But whenever somebody from company B hits someone from company A's car, company B has to pay company A money. So there's money that has to go back and forth. And it's surprising how much effort is spent reconciling all of that. Well, finally we had 2 large insurance companies simply announce that they were going to make their records a single record on the blockchain. So there wouldn't have to be any reconciliation. And, that's a small, modest example. It's not something that changes the world, but it's so obvious in hindsight that there's no need to keep 2 separate records and then spend a lot of time and effort reconciling them. So it's a simple example, but I think it illustrates the simple power of the blockchain. I think there are other situations where we have bigger opportunities when a whole group of companies, a whole ecosystem of companies, they trust each other enough to trade with them, but they keep their own books, their own records. And if you can get an entire ecosystem to work with a single blockchain, then it makes it easier, much easier for those companies to deal with each other.
Or maybe create an infrastructure a unified infrastructure to connect all the blockchains together. If they decide to have different blockchains, maybe a unified ecosystem that would allow them to work with synergy, so to speak.
That's right.
Okay.
The synergies are very real.
Okay.
And now I've cited 2 examples of businesses interacting with each other, but the same principle applies much more broadly. And so that we can have situations where individuals can interact with each other without all of the cost and expense that is typically involved.
Excellent. Another question is, what do you wish to see more of? I think you have already answered it, but what do you really wish to see more of in this crypto space?
I'd really like to see less people trying to be clever, and more people trying to be human-centered and take into account, as you said, human behavior and what the blockchain can do to help benefit people in the here and now setting.
Excellent. You're also a big advocate for education. This YouTube channel is in Spanish. I provide educational value about the fundamentals of how the technology works. So what is your suggestion for the people who are just getting started, besides get educated, learn about the technology? People say maybe we're going to reach a point in which you don't need to understand how the technology works, just like the internet that we use it right now, but we have a long way to go there. The entrepreneurs of the following years and decades, they are going to be the ones creating these use cases for people. So education and any other tips, suggestion that you have for people?
Well, again, the thing I would say is if you really want to learn something, you should try to build it.
Yeah.
Because if you get in and get your hands dirty, so to speak, then and try to create something, that's when you actually learn how something works. It's much better than just reading about it. And so I would encourage them to jump in and get involved.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for the time. I think that's all. It was a pleasure to meet you, sir. Thank you so much. Chao, gracias. Adiós.